スーパーサイヤ人4のことか？ブーがすごかったからな。あの後特訓したんだ。うまくいくかどうか自信なかったけどな。
まるでスーパーサイヤ人のバーゲンセールだな。
Is Dragon Ball Daima in the multiverse of Dragon Ball? Is it not connected to Dragon Ball Super? That is the question we have for today, because as the ending of Dragon Ball Daima has finally concluded, it is clear to say that not only is the ending a huge plot hole for the continuity of Dragon Ball Super, but there are so many things that happen at the end of Dragon Ball Daima episode 20 that are never mentioned again in Dragon Ball Super. It almost feels like they are not even the exact same series. And today we have a lot of evidence showing that it is a possibility, and honestly the reality, I believe, that Dragon Ball Daima is meant to be a one-off story that doesn't actually connect with the events of Dragon Ball Super, at least the Dragon Ball Super we get in the anime. So I know a lot of you guys are going to be in the comments talking about how this is confirmed before Dragon Ball Super. There is no way Dragon Ball Daima is some one-off multiverse story. But let me set the groundwork here and say that Dragon Ball literally is not a stranger to multiverse stories, and they have a ton of different Dragon Ball properties that are all multiversal stories. The original Dragon Ball Z anime and manga have an entire timeline multiverse story with future Trunks, something that even affects Dragon Ball Super with the time rings and Goku Black. Now, this is history changing, not multiverse changing, but it still is a different timeline. Dragon Ball Xenoverse, the entire plot for that, shows us how messing with the timeline brings about multiple universes, multiple futures, and a multiversal experience. And you know what else shows us the multiverse, not only in video game, but also in anime? Dragon Ball Heroes. Dragon Ball Heroes, the entire thing is about multiverses, about different timelines, about different what-ifs. That's basically what Dragon Ball Heroes actually is, to the point where they show us a demon realm that we don't see in Dragon Ball Daima. It is not the same demon realm. They aren't even the same characters in the demon realm. Dragon Ball Daima seems to be its own thing. And probably the most infamous example of two different timelines is the Dragon Ball Super manga and the Dragon Ball Super anime, telling the exact same story almost beat for beat, with huge differences in not only how the stories play out, what transformations we see, and the outcomes of these stories. It almost feels like we are watching and reading two completely different things, to the point where, to be honest, Granola, Moro, those things don't seem to be very important to the Dragon Ball Super anime, because from Broly we skip all the way to Superhero, and Superhero we get a completely different experience. Now, the Dragon Ball Super anime is mentioned in the manga. The Broly arc is mentioned a couple of times, even though we don't get to see that in the manga. So there is connective tissue, but even Superhero has an entire prequel arc that is not in the anime movie at all. And then we get the ending of the Superhero arc, which is not shown in the movie at all, which is Goku versus Beast Gohan. It almost seems like the timeline in the manga and the timeline inside the actual Dragon Ball Super anime are two completely different things. So that is the groundwork that I am laying here, because it almost feels like this is not really as crazy as a question as you would originally think, because Dragon Ball Daima is not supposed to be a part of the Dragon Ball Super run. I don't think that it's supposed to be intentionally made with the purpose of being part of the Dragon Ball Super timeline at all. Now, when it comes to the original multiverse story, Dragon Ball GT, for those of you guys who don't know, is official multiversal Dragon Ball story. Akira Toriyama says that Dragon Ball GT is a grand side story of the original Dragon Ball, and it'll make me happy for us to watch it and enjoy it together. This is him talking about the Dragon Ball GT DVD box set. He specifically says that this is a side story, meaning that it is not part of the main continuity, and that is where we get to this. This is what most people believe Dragon Ball basically to be. And trust me, I would love it for it to be this way because it makes it so much cleaner that we got Dragon Ball GT as its own thing, and then Dragon Ball Daima, the continuity between that and Super and everything else that we're getting all the way up to Superhero is really, really nice. I like the way this map looks, but it doesn't seem to be the reality. Another map that you may have seen is one that is going around right now that I believe is closer to what we're seeing, but not the entire story, because it says Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, and Daima. Both GT and Daima, just like GT is a side story and Daima is supposed to be basically a re-evaluation Akira Toriyama's version of Dragon Ball GT, it is also a side story not connected to Dragon Ball Super, and we see here Dragon Ball Super throughout the Moro arc, Granola arc, and Superhero all down there, while Heroes is its own side thing as well. This one probably far more accurate in my opinion. The only issue with this one is that when it comes to Dragon Ball Super, it is technically correct because the manga is Dragon Ball Super, but the Dragon Ball Super manga is completely and wildly different than this. So I believe that this is more accurate to what we are seeing here, and that is that everything, all three of these stories are separate from each other. They are not connected, at least not the way that we are seeing them. And the reason for that is because, yeah, it looks like that's the way it was intended. Dragon Ball Super is its own thing. GT's a side story. Daima is also a side story because it is essentially Dragon Ball GT. And then you have Dragon Ball Super's manga, which is a completely other different type of story. So these four timelines are all derived from the original Dragon Ball story. And if you're still not convinced, there actually is a interview right before the ending of Dragon Ball Daima for Dragon Ball Daima that kind of shed some light on where it's supposed to go in the timeline. This is a brand new interview with Akio that I don't believe anybody has been talking about because it is only in Japanese. I translated the entire thing, but there was something there, and it was talking about the connection between Dragon Ball Daima and everything else in Dragon Ball, and how Akira Toriyama, the master, the author, decided to connect everything together. The translation says the connection is visible. We know that Daima is a story that takes place after the Majin Buu saga of the original manga, but since Dragon Ball has many different storylines, the connection to the story has become a hot topic among fans. Although it had not been stated explicitly until now, Ino said it is true that the sensei himself is in charge of the story. It is a continuation and is connected to the Majin Buu saga. That is the truth, and that is all. Basically what he's saying here, the way that Akira Toriyama sees Dragon Ball Daima is that it is only confirmed connected to Dragon Ball Z, to the Majin Buu arc. That's it. That's why the story is so heavily connected to the Majins. That's why it is all about the Demon Realm. It is about the last thing we saw in the Majin Buu arc, and I believe that this is Akira Toriyama's last story he wanted to tell. What he would have done right after Dragon Ball Z and connecting everything to Dragon Ball GT and fixing Dragon Ball GT and having more involvement in it, this is what he wanted to do originally, not Dragon Ball Super. He came back for Dragon Ball Super, but that wasn't his first goal. He wanted to make Dragon Ball Daima originally, and he finally got a chance to tell the story he wanted to tell. But again, Daima does not seem to have any continuation at all confirmed to Dragon Ball Super, which means it makes sense why Super Saiyan 4 is at the end, why Super Saiyan 3 is at the end, why we have these demon eyes, and honestly why Pansy leaves with Goku, Vegeta, and the crew. I don't know if you guys saw that at the end. Pansy literally leaves with them. So that means she's in the human world. She actually leaves the demon realm, and we don't see her ever. So this is just a brand new story, a completely different timeline. And it's interesting because everything that happened to Daima changes what happens in Super drastically. Drastically, especially with the power of Super Saiyan 4 as we've seen it. And it'd be really cool to see that play through and see exactly what kind of story that would be. But let me know what you guys think in the comments of this new evidence showing exactly where Dragon Ball Daima actually fits.